Let's talk about the most important battle of World War II that didn't involve a single bullet. I'm talking about the kitchen. Back then, the real fight was feeding your family when the shelves were bone dry and the government told you exactly what you could and couldn't buy. This was the ultimate home front hustle, and let me tell you, it called for a special kind of American moxie. Now, just a quick heads up. This video is for historical and educational purposes only. We aren't telling you to go out and try every single thing here without using some modern-day common sense and safety standards. Stay smart, folks. A lot of people today think the prepper movement is some brand new trend. Give me a break. The original OGs of preparedness were the moms, dads, and kids of the 1940s. They weren't worrying about some what-if future. They were dealing with the here and now of scarcity. They were tough as nails, smart as a whip, and could make $1 out of 15 cents. This wasn't just some highbrow military strategy. This was kitchen table grit. Now, everyone's heard of Victory Gardens, but most folks today underestimate just how much of a game changer they really were. This wasn't just a polite suggestion to grow a couple of puny tomatoes. It was a national call to arms, and your weapon was a trowel. The government pushed everyone to dig in and turn every square inch of dirt, backyards, empty lots, even apartment window boxes, into a food factory. The logic behind it was a total no-brainer. If regular folks grew their own greens, it freed up the commercial supply, the tin cans, the railroad cars, and the labor, to get hot meals to the boys overseas. It was do it yourself before that was even a catchphrase. My grandma had one, and let me tell you, she didn't treat it like a hobby. It was her second shift. You'd come home from a long day at the plant and get right to weeding and watering. Even the kids had their own little plots to mind. It turned everyone from a consumer into a producer, literally from the ground up. And man, did it pay off. By 1944, those little patches of dirt were cranking out nearly 40% of all the fresh veggies in the US. Just let that sink in for a minute. Back then, meat was precious, harder to find than a needle in a haystack. Ration points were tighter than a drum, so you couldn't just slap a 2-pound steak on the table and call it a day. You had to pull some serious rabbit out of a hat. The secret sauce? Extenders and fillers. You'd take a little bit of ground beef and mix it with breadcrumbs soaked in milk, or maybe some rolled oats, grated spuds, or even mashed lentils. Those fillers would soak up all the juices and fat, bulking up the meal like nobody's business. Meatloaf, shepherd's pie, or a big pot of chili. Suddenly the meat was just there for flavor instead of being the main event. It was a way to stretch your protein and your paycheck, and it was downright clever engineering on a shoestring budget. If there was one old reliable method for getting through a lean week, it was the perpetual soup pot. This was a throwback to the old days that saw a massive comeback. The rule was simple: nothing edible hits the trash can. You'd start with a good bone, a ham bone or a beef knuckle, and let it simmer until it smelled like heaven. Then every little scrap went into that pot. Carrot ends, celery tops, the last handful of beans from the garden, yesterday's leftover potatoes, maybe a bit of barley. The pot was never empty. You just kept adding water and whatever bits and bobs you had throughout the week. It was different every day, but always hot and stuck to your ribs. It wasn't about following a recipe. It was about a waste not, want not mindset. That pot was the ultimate way to make do and mend your appetite. Now, when a Victory Garden goes into overdrive, you run into a good problem. 50 pounds of tomatoes ripening all at once. You can't eat them that fast, and you sure as heck aren't going to let them rot. That's where the summer kitchen and home canning came in. It was like a neighborhood food factory. The ladies would get together, sweating over those hot stoves, sharing the load. You'd hear the ping of those glass jars sealing, tomatoes, beans, peaches, you name it. That ping was the sound of pure security. It meant you had food put back for the winter, and you didn't have to worry about the store shelves being empty or running out of ration points. It took a lot of elbow grease, and you had to watch those temperatures like a hawk, but it gave people a sense of control. A pantry full of those jars wasn't just food, it was peace of mind. The government and the big food companies put out all sorts of pamphlets and cookbooks full of what we'd call life hacks today. They taught people the chemistry of how to swap things out, like using honey or corn syrup when sugar was scarce, or using a splash of vinegar to sour regular milk when you needed buttermilk for baking. But the real inside baseball happened between neighbors talking over the back fence. That's how you learned the tricks of the trade. Like how to roast dandelion roots to make a coffee substitute that didn't taste like total engine oil. Or how to use every single part of a chicken, rendering the fat for cooking, boiling the bones for stock, and even using the feathers to stuff a pillow. This neighbor-to-neighbor network was like a grassroots intelligence operation. It was a collective brain trust, solving the problem of what's for dinner, one meal at a time. And the ingenuity didn't stop at the dinner plate. Once the basics were covered, people started getting really MacGyver with it, squeezing every bit of value out of everything. Since sugar was rationed to the high heavens, folks had to find sweetness wherever they could. They'd stretch a cup of sugar by mixing it with honey or corn syrup. The real pros would mash up overripe bananas to naturally sweeten their breads and cakes. They'd even take the juice from canned peaches and boil it down into a syrup. You weren't just cooking. You were on a reconnaissance mission to find sweetness in the dark corners of the pantry. There was also a big-time revival in foraging. This wasn't some trendy weekend hobby, it was a necessity. People started remembering what their grandparents knew. Dandelion greens became a spring salad. Wild berries were gathered for jam. Folks on the coast used seaweed as a thickener. They even gathered wild rose hips to make tea because they were loaded with vitamin C. Seeing the backyard as a grocery store took some know-how, but it added some much-needed variety to a boring diet. It was free food, paid for with nothing but your time and attention. Seed saving was another cornerstone of the whole operation. The Victory Garden was great for year one, but what about next year? You couldn't always count on the store having seeds in stock. So, gardeners became the masters of their own destiny. They'd let their best plants go to seed, then collect, dry, and store them in labeled envelopes for the next spring. That's food security at its most basic level, owning the means of production. Neighbors would swap seeds, creating tough, local varieties that grew like weeds in their specific soil. Call it biosecurity before the experts even had a name for it. Rationing also sparked a whole horse trading economy. Maybe your family had some extra sugar points, but you were desperate for a new pair of shoes for the kids. Or maybe your neighbor had an apple tree that was dropping fruit like crazy, but she didn't have any canning jars. So, you'd cut a deal. You'd see kids running diplomatic missions down the block. Take this jar of pickles to Mrs. Henderson and see if she's got any spare shortening. It was a person-to-person economy that built a real sense of community. You had to be a good neighbor because your network was your safety net. When you step back and look at the big picture, what does all this add up to? It's more than just a few clever kitchen tricks. It was a total shift in the American mindset. We went from being passive consumers to being active producers and managers. Every scrap had a purpose. Every bit of dirt had potential. People stopped just spending money and started investing their time into creating their own resources. That mindset meant that waste almost completely disappeared. Leftovers, as we think of them today, didn't really exist because nothing stayed left over for long. Mashed potatoes were fried into pancakes the next morning. Stale bread became croutons or bread pudding. Even the vegetable peelings went into the soup pot or the compost pile for next year's crop. They were the ultimate environmentalists, not because it was fashionable, but because it was the only way to survive. Was it a hard row to hoe? You bet it was. Was it boring eating the same stuff all the time? Absolutely. But if you read the letters or talk to the folks who lived through it, they have this sense of hard-earned pride. There was a real dignity in that struggle, a satisfaction in looking at a pantry full of jars you put up with your own two hands. There was pride in putting a meal on the table that was truly yours, from the dirt to the plate. It was a shared struggle, and that's what built a shared purpose. That right there is the real legacy of the 1940s. It wasn't just about making it through the war. It was a masterclass in being resourceful that shaped a whole generation of Americans. It proved that real security doesn't always come from having a lot of money or a full store. Sometimes it comes from your own cleverness, your neighbors, and a stubborn refusal to let an empty cupboard get the best of you. Makes you look at your own kitchen a little differently, doesn't it? Which of these old-school methods do you think would be the hardest to pull off today? Or better yet, which one would be the most rewarding? Is it the neighborhood bartering, the war on waste, or something else entirely? I want to hear your stories. Drop a comment down below and let's get the conversation started.